happening, everybody?
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Nick.
All right, let's get started. Hey, all you Ethicuties, last session. This is kind of like the happy hour session. We have the great women in compliance, one and only Matt Kelly. We've had a phenomenal day. Broke all of our records. This is officially the biggest ethics and compliance event in the history of the world. So round of applause for all of you guys for coming. I had a goal of 40,000. You know, I always keep score with something. 40,000 was the big goal. We already got to 53,000, almost 54,000 emoji reactions. Somebody said, why are there so many emojis going? And so, yeah, because people are freaking loving Ethicsverse Day. So really excited to get you guys on. The three of you are really like so much of my story in this space. I've been in this space for 10 years, and who better to finish the day with than, you know, the three of you who have had such an impact on my thinking in this space and so forth. So as we get started here, like I said, this is the last session of the day. Drop your LinkedIn URLs in the chat. Again, you got to connect. You got to keep building your network, because your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. This session is the Ask Me Anything. So we've aggregated a bunch of questions, a bunch of these topics that, you know, we're going to get some expertise from the great women in compliance. You know, and if you guys are not following that podcast, and you're not following Ellen, and you're not following Lisa on LinkedIn, I would really encourage you to do that. It is really one of my favorite podcasts of all time. Sarah was going to join us. She had a personal emergency and is not able to make it. And of course, the one and only Hema Lomax was not able to make it as well. But I really love the podcast. I really can't say enough about it. I love listening every week when you guys drop episodes. And yeah, so absolutely go follow that right now. If you're here for credits, this is the place to be. We got 13 credits for all the sessions. Just make sure that you are registered. And we, of course, are giving out 100 books. So we're almost at 60,000 emojis. We're blowing all my goals out of the water. I love it. We're giving away 100 books today. So you can pick from any of the books in the library. But for this session, we are absolutely featuring the Sending the Elevator Back Down, which Lisa Fine wrote along with Mary Shirley. And the book has so many great stories in it. It really is an encouraging book. It's an inspiring book. And so if you have not read that book yet, get active in the chat, ask some more questions, and win yourself a book. If you want to be quiet in the chat and you don't care about books, well, then you should at least check out the toolkits that the team at Ethico here put together. This has 20 different tools that you can download. These are all free. Like we always say on the Ethicsverse, you get no bonus points for reinventing the wheel. So there's a lot of stuff here that you can download. You can repurpose for your organization, add your logos, put your own spin on it. But it's a little springboard to get you started. So those should be available on the console. And if not, you can Google Ethicsverse Day Ethico, and on that landing page is a link to all the toolkits. 20 toolkits. Who loves you? Amazing. All right. For today, anybody, if you're interested in any of our solutions, you ready for a no pitch zone demonstration just to see what's out there? You know, it's incumbent on you to have at your fingertips, or at least know kind of what is out there. 25% off, because we love you. So we're featuring today Policy Plus, our AI solutions within the case management system, which people who have started using it are absolutely loving, from an analytics or from a summarizing all the documents and all the notes attached to various investigations or your current kind of active cases. That's phenomenal. And our third party plus, this is something that, you know, you spend so much time on, so much risk lives in your third parties as our supply chains have gotten more complex. So all those things are featured today. We're launching Third Party Plus today. This is an AI-driven platform that, I'm telling you, once you see it, you're going to absolutely die. You might want to do that demonstration laying on the floor. Also, you are probably one, you know, we spent a lot of time today talking about a culture of integrity. And sometimes it's very difficult to know where to get started. So we have a new tool, a culture assessment tool, that allows you to build a culture assessment. We have a bunch of templates that you can start with, where you can build a culture assessment. You can send it around through your organization and get some real visibility into where your culture is at. So much, you know, we said in the first session that you're never going to achieve 100% compliance. There's always going to be some room for improvement. But a culture assessment will at least give you some data points to get started with, to understand where some of those hot spots are across the risk surface of your organization that you're responsible for building the circumstances for compliant behavior. So the culture assessment gives you dynamic questions, a campaign manager, gives you automatic follow-up, and then heat maps and a bunch of analytics that can come out of them. So if you're interested in that, once again, 25% off of all those things. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my main man, coolest guy in compliance, Matt Kelly, carried the weight of the world on his shoulders in the last session, which was an awesome keynote, man. How's it going, Matt?
It's going very well. Thank you, Nick, for the kind words. And Lisa and Ellen, it is great to have you here and talk with you both again. So, as Nick said, we don't have any really tightly prescribed agenda for this next hour, this final wrap-up session. We just want to talk about the state of the compliance profession generally, lessons learned in career success that Lisa and Ellen have found, either lessons that they would recommend to others or things learned the hard way that people would rather want to avoid. Anything else that is on listeners' minds, either about what we heard earlier today or just on your mind about the compliance profession generally these days. That can be the job market, big challenges you have, how to deal with boards, how to get on the board's radar screen. We could go on and on. With that, I will maybe throw it out to Lisa and Ellen, just generally, like, I don't know how much you have listened to previous sessions from the Ethicsverse today. I listened to some, not as many as I would have liked, and I did lead the most recent session with the Justice Department current AAG, Tyson Duva, and his predecessors at the fraud section, who gave sort of a roundtable. But like, what has jumped out to you both, and then to Nick as well? I'd like to hear your thoughts because you've been on more of these sessions. Like, what are the big things that jumped out at you today? I'll start with you, Lisa, and then Ellen, and then Nick. But I don't know. What's on your mind?
All right. Well, thanks, Matt. First of all, it's just an honor to be here with some of my favorite people and seeing so many of you in the chat and the conversation. So thank you. And thank you, Nick, for the regular glow up in photos. We really do love that. Now, with that in mind, I mean, top of mind, obviously, were the last two sessions, listening to the AAG, and then you all. First of all, biggest thing that came to my mind is part of my job is to avoid having to have the discussions that a lot of the last panel had, which is, are you going to self-disclose? Are you going to drop by the Department of Justice? And even though I live in Washington, D.C., I will tell you, I am never going to just drop by there. I think it's a really interesting thought. So I thought it was very interesting, being friends, those points. I don't think I'd want to be friends with my prosecutor, but on the other hand, I would want to have a level of professional respect, that they know that, I think, I know that, that they would respect me and have credibility. I think part of my goal are all of those things starting from the beginning. But I really hope that I'm not thinking about things in the context in which that they're all speaking about them right now. But I do think that the cartels point is very interesting. So I always find it interesting to listen to the experts on the distinction between what we do every day and where the law is.
Ellen, what about you?
Everything that Lisa said, but also I'm just struck by the increased maturity and sophistication. I was thinking a bit about how, I started out in this profession more than a few years ago, and we were very, very rules-based. And now I think they're very focused on why do people do what they do and how can we harness that. And just very impressed with the maturity and the increased sophistication that I'm seeing through all the presentations, and real depth. I think real depth and real informative information, and really more thoughtful processes and more thoughtful ways of dealing with one another.
Love that.
Nick?
Yeah, I mean, we're all kind of part of this, right? Like, we're all kind of trying to push this forward. And all of our little, all of our kind of contributions to this industry. We're all trying to improve our programs. We're trying to get better every single day and drive that continuous improvement and drive, this culture of integrity from a word on the wall to the way that people actually behave. And it's got to be so rewarding to see how far we as an industry have come. And like, at some level, we're kind of just getting started. Like, we're now everyone is really kind of talking about this really exciting stuff. Like, we all have, those words, in the binders, those words on the policies, those kind of building blocks, obviously super critical. But like the last mile of impact is really on the human behavior point to your point. And that's where, so much impact can actually be, everything happens kind of little by little and then all at once. And it feels like we're kind of stepping into that all at once phase.
Here's a question from a listener, actually, and I'm going to put it to everybody right away. I guess Ellen and Lisa mostly, but Nick, if you had any thoughts too. But they're just asking, if you're going to build a compliance program, what's the first element you would start with? And I don't know if there is a element that you'd start with because it's easier, or how do you review the fragments that you have and figure out which one is the place to start? But I guess, Lisa, let me ask you, and then Ellen, and then Nick, if you had any thoughts. But how do you figure out where to begin?
Well, I mean, the first and the standard answer, I think, on this is often you do your risk assessment. You're going to look at where your areas are of greatest risk throughout your organization, because you don't want to spend your time at the very beginning focusing on the things that aren't key to you. And I think that is kind of the basic answer. The more nuanced answer in my mind is actually, while you're doing that, go out and kind of do a listening tour, whether it's virtual or in person. Understand, you can understand what you view the company's largest risks are, but if you don't build your credibility or being new in that role of hearing what people think, and that will be often a theme of what I'll probably even speak about today. Feel like you're about to ask a question.
What do you ask them, though, on the listening tour? Do you ask them, what do you worry about? Do you ask them what's not working? Do you ask them, what does everybody know but nobody sells management? What are some of the questions?
I think, in my mind, I think the first thing is, what do you do? I mean, start real basic with what is your job? What do you see as important to your job? What do you think goes well? Start a little, and then what concerns you? Do you feel heard? I mean, and because you have to build trust, because remember, you're coming in, if you're building from the beginning and you may be a new person in the organization, some people may drop all their information with you, but others may just not trust it to begin with. So I think a lot of it is starting with questions that make them feel comfortable and know that you're willing to understand and engage with what they're doing. Now, that may not be part of your first initial remit in your mind, but that will build those relationships going forward. And if problems happen down the line, when something does go wrong, they'll remember you as a decent human being who came out and cared and knew things. So, I think that's my approach. But I think it also depends on your, organization and what you're trying to do. If you've come in right after a huge crisis and problem, you may want to kind of start with what went wrong to get you there. So I think it comes back to thinking about who is your audience and what are your problems.
Ellen, what's your take on either what to ask on the listening tour, or how do you decide what's the first element that you build in your compliance program? How do you figure that out?
Yeah. So the questions I ask is, of the leaders, what do you need? What do you want? That can often be very telling as to where the gaps are. And I think Lisa's right on the mark. It's all about risk. You have to understand what the business does and why it does it. What is it trying to achieve? And you importantly also have to understand the other side of risk, which is there are some things that you might not be able to change because they're totally dependent on achieving the goals, whether they're financial or otherwise. So you really need to understand, what are people doing, why, what for, how come, and with that you'll learn a lot about the business, and you'll build that trust that Lisa is talking about. You're there to, as Hema Lomax would say, to be a guide. You're not there to necessarily disrupt the business or tell them how to do their business, but you're there to enhance and bring value. So you have to understand what that value is, and you won't know that if you don't know what they need and what they want.
So, Nick, give me your take on this, although I can see from the comments in the chat, there are a lot of people who agree with the idea of building the community. A lot of people who are also saying, well, start with policies. That's always a good place to start first. And I would have thought something like start with training, because frankly, it can be easy. But Nick, what's your take on how to try and get these things going? How to try to figure out where you start?
So I think, and I've kind of stolen this from Ross Ronan because I've seen a lot of success in this. He runs Ronan Healthcare Consultants and or Healthcare Compliance Consultants, and he's really smart. And when I asked him this question, how do you like how I'm citing my answer here? Okay. When I asked him this question, he said, there's this desire or this kind of knee-jerk response to like want to start with policies or want to start with trainings and things like that. But he said the most important thing to get started is an enterprise-wide disclosure system. And I think that coupled with, the listening tour that Lisa talked about and understanding, from leaders what Ellen talked about, that gives you kind of some channels to understand, as you're building your risk, like you don't want to take a risk assessment off the shelf, right? As you're building that risk assessment and as you're kind of devising what your training plan is, you're at least starting to get some insights and getting some of those communication channels opened up because, as I always say, you can't do a compliance job without it's a human business. Like you need risk intelligence from people in the organization. And I think when you can couple when you can couple that listening tour and those initial relationship building efforts that Ellen alluded to with a way for people inside the organization, stakeholders in the organization to start to share what's on their mind, that can give you some good insight and to make better bets with your training or with your which policies are most important. We can't boil the ocean, of course, and it's difficult to not fall into that boil the ocean trap when you're starting something from scratch.
Here's another question that I think probably comes up a lot, and I don't know if Ellen or Lisa, either of you have experienced this yourselves. One listener who said, "This is all great advice. Now, how do I do it when it's just me, the team of one?" Ellen, I'll put it to you first this time, and then Lisa. What would you counsel this person?
I would counsel that you need to make allies and friends within the organization, your HR folks, your marketing folks, your comms folks, right? You need to rely on others to help you get it done because you will never be able to get it all done by yourself. And they probably have resources that you will never be able to purchase on your person of one budget. So make friends, make lots and lots of friends and do favors for them so that they'll do favors for you.
Lisa?
I think there's a lot of truth. I think that's really important. Those relationships are important for those things as your team of one. They may have their needs as well. The other thing is you go back to your priorities because there's been a decision that you are a team of one or you are a team of two. So you have to make some good, hard choices. And as a limited resource, you're not going to be able to do everything. Even when you have the team you want, you're never going to be able to do that. If somebody says that they can, or they just say use a little more AI, I mean, you got to use your tools smartly, in a smart manner. And you have to be able to make choices and say, if they're like, why aren't we doing, this amazing trainings that would make everybody happy? It's, well, here are the 4 things I'm doing in my risk assessment, and this is the training. If you want a different kind of training, here are some tools or solutions that we could move that forward. You can offer that up, but you can't. I think talking as a woman, as part of the Great Women in Compliance, I think many of us are always trying to achieve. I mean, everyone is, but overachieve. And I often don't want to let anybody down. And then you realize that sometimes that making the hard call is what you need to do to be able to get what you need.
I immediately, as I was listening to both of you, I was thinking a bit about Christy Grant Hart and her books on being an effective compliance officer. And basically, she emphasized you have to know what not to do and what not to focus on because you do have too much. And if you just focus on that thing that comes through the door, you are never going to get around to what you want to do. I would also stress to this listener that you are not alone as the compliance team of one. I have been astounded over the years at how many large companies I've met the chief compliance officer and the team is them and maybe an admin and a passcode to the photocopier. And that's the compliance function. And these are huge companies I've seen over the years. Nick, what are your thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
I want to jump in with one other point before I forget this one, because I think one of the great things about this profession is you are an army of one often in your company or your organization, but this community, dropping your LinkedIn or reaching out to people because you're not having the same maybe competition that sales might or other things to sell the same product. Yep. People are out there. Sometimes they may not write back right when you want them to or a thing like that, but you build those relationships. I mean, Ellen is an advocate and a mentor to me. But I got to know her originally. She was the first episode of the podcast and became a friend. But I'm just saying, you build these friendships and relationships, and you may find those actually more helpful at times than some of the people that you work with, because they'll be able to help you with an anonymized sanity check or something else. So don't take for granted all the people that you're in the Ethicsverse or that you meet, because frankly, we're all pretty excited when somebody else wants to help us out.
Totally. And I mean, we could spend a whole hour talking about that exact thing. The unique thing that is this ethics and compliance community. We're all fighting the same battle. We're all fighting for, better cultures, people feeling more value, de-risking our organizations, and that lack of competition, that sort of unified purpose that spans our industry, even across competitors in a particular, sub-niche of an industry, is something that I just wish more of us took advantage of. Because it can be a very lonely job, especially when you are that that army of one, as somebody just said in the chat. The one thing I would add to this is that, I was reading that that movie Troy. Remember that movie Troy with Brad Pitt and all that? Yeah. Christopher Nolan was up for directing that, and then somebody else ended up directing it. And that movie would have looked very, very different. We just kind of saw the kind of movie that Christopher Nolan makes around this sort of topic. And what kind of struck me in that is that the same amount, the similar script would have looked very different with those different directors. And I think one of the unique things about being in this space, especially when you're an army of one or a department of one, or even if you're just, in a large organization where you have this sort of small team, it's on you and it's up to you to be the director. You direct the movie how you want to direct it. There's no right way to do compliance. Of course, there's best practices, and of course, there's principles that you can borrow from and so forth. But I think, kind of to what you were saying, Matt, expertise in any field is about knowing what matters and what doesn't matter. And any movie that you see, there are hours and hours of footage that don't make it into the 2 hours or the 90 minutes. So they're cutting away a lot of different things to kind of, achieve their ends and achieve their goal. And that is some freedom, and that's an opportunity for your creativity and your agency as you're building your program to just do something. Do what makes the most sense to you, because you have a lot of freedom and a lot of creative potential in the building of and the application of your program.
We had a couple of different people in the chat here talking about how compliance can be lonely, which is true, and it can be a challenging and difficult profession, also true. I don't think I need to tell any of our panelists here about that, but last month, for example, I published a research report about the rampant retaliation that compliance officers themselves face. And I won't toot my own horn too much here, but it was hundreds of compliance officers, and they basically, the math was about 70% said they had experienced retaliation. Another 9% are pretty sure they did, but aren't entirely. But that's 79. That's a huge number. And to a certain extent, I'm just wondering how you either would cope with that, or how do you recommend to others that we cope with these pressures that other professions or other disciplines in the enterprise, they don't face this the same way compliance officers do. And it can be a very challenging thing to stand up and call out to management. We have this issue. I know you don't want to hear it, but here it is. And how do you do that? And how do you withstand those pressures? Ellen, let me ask you first on your thoughts on that, and then Lisa. But what are we supposed to do with this fact of life?
So I think one of the things that we do that we shouldn't is we wait until there's an issue. And what we don't do is we don't train our board and our executives on what the expectations are to respond to bad news, okay? Because we let them sometimes target us instead of really dealing with the problem. And we have seen cases where, executives, CEOs are caught on the Jumbotron and then get to resign. Well, the message for that to the whole organization is it's okay to have an affair with a subordinate. And by the way, you get paid for doing so as you leave. So we have to have these conversations and set the framework and the expectations earlier, so that what we're saying is, look, we're here to help figure out how to solve the problem. We're not the problem, right? And there is a pattern that I've seen over and over and over again. And it's an emotional reaction to hearing something about someone that you trust, that you've worked with, that you like. And I call it, the 4Ds, right? The first thing the person does is they deny it. There's no way Matt would have been stealing from us for years. Just no way. He's such a great guy, right? And then they need to demask. Who came forward? Who said that? Why did they say that? And then they need to discredit. Well, Matt's just a constant complainer anyway. So, it can't be true. And then there's the dismissal part, which, to your point, Matt, sometimes the dismissal is the messenger. Mm-hmm. And we've got to break the 4D pattern.
Lisa, what's your thoughts or advice about this? And it's something all compliance officers, and we all know what happens. It weighs on people's minds. What's the tactics to try and diffuse it, or the inner reserves people could try and draw on to stick with? This is the job, but it's tough.
Yeah, I think it's one of the risks. Absolutely. To overstate it, but it is, in some ways, it's similar to salespeople who may try to do the right thing and fail, and then they say they should go, and then you recognize, okay, they had the right behaviors, they didn't do a deal to cheat. Basically, everybody in their area has particular sensitivities that they may lose their job for, and it's particularly scary for us because you're bringing up those issues. I think what Ellen said is spot on. I also think that raising these as potential risks earlier on, not, oh my God, I can't believe Matt did this, but before that, we have poor controls in these 5 areas. Do you want to test them? And if that's what then figures it out, then you've also gone through your process and other things. And it is emotional. And I think many of us have gone through the experience of being surprised about someone, even in our role in compliance, where you find out as you start an investigation, something happens and you're thinking, wait, that's not where I thought this would go, or this individual. It's very hard and emotional. I think you have to be prepared. I also think that if you feel like eventually you're going to get blamed whenever things go wrong with others, I know it may be not a great thing to think about in the job market, but that's the problem at the organization. And you might not want to stay there forever if, instead of trying to fix problems, there's nuances, but if you're living in a blame culture forever, it's not like, okay, I'll quit tomorrow. We can't do that, but you really have to look at what they're prioritizing.
But to Ellen's point, we do have what we're kind of talking about is like influence and kind of pulling the objections forward. We're trying to we have the opportunity to frame our role before the bad thing happens and before we have to come to them with that kind of a bad news. And if we can give them some pattern recognition, or if we can bring that forward before something bad is going on, well, then we've at least kind of paved the way a little bit, so that when that comes up, you at least can reference back to that other conversation and say, remember, we talked about this 3 months ago, that there could be a time where I'm coming to you with something and these 4Ds are going to happen. If not by you, then somebody else in the organization. And I think if we can kind of move some of those chess pieces, kind of thinking a couple of moves ahead, we can really kind of avoid a lot of anxiety and a lot of the fallout from, being kind of deemed the bearer of bad news, or, whatever the kind of negative moniker is, by doing a little bit of that pre-work. But it's on, this is not a unique thing, right? To your point, Matt, and in that study, this is not 2% of compliance officers felt this, or 2% of HR people have been scapegoated for something. It's pretty pervasive. That's the odds of that happening, at least from a perceived retaliation perspective, is pretty high. So I think it's just good career, insurance or something, to have some of those conversations early and at least walk, it's kind of like a tabletop exercise, walk them through what this might look like. Hey, if our CEO is found on the Jumbotron, how would we handle that? there is a risk that I would be blamed for that. And my job here, again, taking control of the narrative, my job here is not to ruin our company. My job here is to pursue a culture of integrity, or my job here is to de-risk the organization. And sometimes I find information that other people don't have. How would we handle that kind of a thing? And again, if you can lay some of that groundwork or lay some of that foundation, that can do a lot down the road versus, the other scenario where everybody's kind of in reactionary mode, kind of caged animal mode, and just kind of going off of those animal spirits,
So I guess maybe in this vein of that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. I am not advocating that compliance officers go and suffer some retaliation, but I am curious about what are some of the challenges that compliance officers face that make them better compliance officers. And if you've ever looked back on your own careers and said, okay, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was a really good formative thing for me to go through, whether it was a very intense investigation, whether it was a project you attempted and failed, whether it was something that you did and you surprised yourself how successful it was, I don't know. But Ellen, let me ask you first and then Lisa, but what are the sort of things you look back and say, this was a really valuable experience for me before that makes me a better ethics and compliance person today? What are those things?
It's such an interesting question because sometimes you don't reflect back, but I got tapped to be an ethics compliance officer when I was in, legal counsel, and I was an M&A lawyer. Guys, I was doing deals. And I was kind of very attached to that identity. I thought it was cool, right? I thought, oh my goodness, wheeler dealer. And I had my boss and another important person come to me and say, Ellen, you belong over here. This is a better place for you. This is where your strengths and talents are. And I thought, I'm getting sidelined. Who wants to do compliance? But it ended up being a wonderful thing for me. And I will be forever grateful for those people who really not only kind of opened my eyes up to the fact that I could do other things, got me out of my silo, but it expanded my world. And I will tell you the one thing that I think is so fulfilling about being in ethics and compliance is, in comparison to being legal counsel, with no disregard to my fellow members of the bar, I wasn't just writing memos or writing non-disclosure agreements and doing negotiations. It's actually helping people, So very, very informative. And then I had another experience where I was tapped to become the chief audit executive. I'm not a CPA. I don't really have audit experience per se, but it was another place where other leaders said to me, Ellen, you can do this. You would be good at this and you should do it. And I had never thought of myself that way. And it increased my breadth and my experience and my skills. And so those, I think, are the two big ones.
I have to admit, I think going from M&A to compliance is a bigger jump than going from compliance to audit. That part I can see. I've heard it. Ethics and compliance is wow. All right. Lisa, what would you say to that question?
So in terms of challenges and to reflect, I wouldn't say some of them to me. One from a big picture is having worked in global organizations is everything I constantly keep learning from a cultural standpoint of how can I be trusted by people in different places in the world. I had something many years ago where in India doing an anti-harassment training. And since it's been over 10 years, I have no problem. The beginning of it was when I asked what people thought. Unfortunately, I had a woman who was doing this with me who was Indian nationality. And the first thing, I said, what do people think is harassment? And we had one person who said rape, which I also reminded people was a crime. And then somebody says sitting next to someone else's wife on the bus. And, it was like, okay, we are far away here. And learning learning on the job on how do you respond to these things? And then talking about things like, child marriage, about what is harassment versus what you do in the US. Like, how do you learn to understand that and be able to figure out who the right person is to be giving the message and the training? I'm not sure if I was quite as prepared or suited to do that at the time. But I think those things you learn from. I think it's also like the Ted Lasso, you're a goldfish. You learn it and you just got to move on because you can't beat yourself up about these things forever. So I think that's one of them. And that's kind of one of the major ones. I also think everything Ellen says is absolutely correct. But I mean, you learn from that. You also learn the first time you think you made the biggest mistake ever, and then you realize that the world didn't end. Mm-hmm. And that you learn from mistakes, and by talking about them with the right people, not beating yourself up forever. It's like, this went wrong, let's solve it. Whereas I think a lot of us, and I think seeing people asking questions about women, sometimes we may beat ourselves up more about it than men who just move on to the next thing. I don't want to overgeneralize two genders, but I mean, it's something that for me has been a learned skill. Like, don't get too excited when you have the best thing ever happen, and don't beat yourself up too much when the worst one does.
Well, I think it's so easy to beat yourself up, and I think so many of us in this space are perfectionists, and we care so much, and we don't, many of us have sort of clawed our way to where we're at. Like, I don't think any path up the mountain is like easy. It's all uphill. You know what I mean? And it's hard. That is definitely a learned skill. And that's definitely a learned perspective to realize that, like, life is more like, I don't know, baseball than brain surgery. Like, baseball, you can strike out a bunch, you can mess up a bunch, and you can still wind up in the Hall of Fame. Brain surgery, you can't sneeze. You know what I'm saying? You can't sneeze, you're going to have a real problem on your hands. And it's hard to kind of distinguish that, like, what matters and what doesn't matter. But, you just have to keep kind of moving forward, because you can end up paralyzing yourself. You can end up kind of being totally paralyzed in action out of fear of screwing something up or something going wrong. And I don't know, you can usually kind of adjust. You can usually make an adjustment and clean something up. And very rarely is it kind of a career-ending move when something doesn't go right,
Nick, I'm just going to say something else really fast about that. Don't think that any of us have this figured out.
Totally.
There's some. I mean, when I speak about, everybody is struggling with these things in their own work and day to day. The best we can do, and this is what we try to do in the podcast, is, bring the sense of community and discussions of how do we learn to do this better. But I would hate for anyone in the audience with their emojis that I'm not seeing right now thinking, okay, we've got this all figured out, so it goes perfectly every day. That is not the case, but you kind of use your experience for your own benefit.
Well, it's easy to kind of see somebody else, whether it's somebody in your industry or somebody in your company or somebody at a different level, and be like, oh, they have it all figured out. But I think the dirty secret, or maybe the really freeing, inspiring secret, at least for me, is that nobody knows what they're doing. Everybody's just kind of figuring it out. So I can do that. I can figure it out if that's really what the secret is. But that's kind of a very freeing thing, to your point. And there's a lot of humility in what you just said. And I think that, it really resonates with me, because, any age you're at, you've never been at that age before. And anytime you're a parent or whatever life event is happening, that's for the first time, like, you've never experienced that before. So everybody is going through that. This wave of life kind of continues to crash. It continues to kind of roll across each of our individual lives. And, there's freedom in just doing your best,
Lisa, let me ask another question about the Great Women in Compliance podcast, because now it is going, I believe you are currently in your 10th year. I think you and Mary Shirley started it in 2017, if I remember correctly.
2018, I think, but 18? It's been a long time.
Well, that's my question. Like, it has been a long time, and what keeps it going? And there are many, many great women working in compliance, so you could certainly keep interviewing people probably forever. But if maybe you and then Ellen could just kind of expound a bit on what makes it such a good and lasting thing in a community. Because it looks to me like you could keep rocking and rolling with this for another 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, I think, first of all, at the very beginning, I think part of it is we had no idea what we were doing. And I think you'll remember that very clearly, Matt, because I went to Boston and you, Mary, and I sat in a room and we asked you the question, how do we record a podcast? So just to people keep some perspective, it started when we were at a conference, and Tom Fox, Mary and I went to Tom Fox and a group of men, and mostly in this group, I thought it was bar talk, and said, you've no compliance podcasts hosted by women, which has obviously changed since then. And he said, great, why don't you two start one? I basically had another drink and thought, we'll call it a night. And then the next day he had us record. who we were and what we were trying to do. And that was invented. So I say that because I had no idea what it would be or what it would become. And then Mary and I had a format that we used for the first 200 episodes where it was interviewing one person back and forth. Mary, which is, wanted at some point, she was writing another book. She was doing more teaching. So for me, I sat down and thought, okay, when we get to 200, do we want to stop? Meaning, do I want to? And I talked to a lot of people and thought, what will make this keep going in a different kind of iteration, but also bring something to this community? And also, a lot of the people that started this profession were women, and sometimes men got into it when it sort of became cooler and more white collar. And it was to recognize them historically from the people who got slotted in it until now. We still identified that as a need. I then talked to Ellen and Hema and Sarah and said, let's try to do some roundtables. Let's try to do this differently. What can we do? Will this still be valuable to people? And B, what can we do to make it interesting and keep it going? So I think of that as a GWIC 2.0. And I've loved that experience. It's been in many ways, it's been a different podcast with some of the same cast of characters and a different way to do it. And that's how I think we'll keep it going. And we keep talking about that. We also like to have, sometimes, we have men, we've had people who are transgender, because it's a supportive community as a whole. I think it's kind of transcended that part, although we do primarily focus on women, obviously, that we share with others. I mean, you both have been part of the podcast in our community, and we're very grateful for it. So, and for me, it's a great way to keep a network and to get to do things like this and talk to other people. I get to meet, if I have questions about an area, I assume lots of other people might, and then we can figure out who does it, who knows it.
Ellen, give us your take on this, and how did you get roped into this? What made you say, I want to be part of this, and what's it like now being part of the community?
Well, Lisa just reached out to me, and we started on this concept of the round table. But what I think makes it successful is the listeners, right? Because just like all the questions we're getting here, people want to kind of crowdsource and get answers to some of their problems. And that's what we really kind of try to focus on is, how are other people doing things? How have they handled and navigated challenges? What's been successful for them? What have been some of their failures? And so it's really the community that makes it the success.
Nick, do you have any observations before I start diving into it? I just realized we had 24 listener questions. I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, no, all good. We can dive into those. I would just kind of echo what they said. I think I learned so much in this space. We do these webinars every single week. You come on, you bring on great guests. I listen to GWIC all the time. There's so many different perspectives in this space as we're all trying to kind of, untie the same kind of knot, and I don't know. It's just a really cool space. It's I've worked in a lot of different industries, and I really feel like I've found my home here because there's so many like-minded people. We're all trying to kind of make the world better, leave it in a better spot. And there's just so much to learn. It's an ever changing, ever kind of evolving set of puzzles. And it's, I don't know, it's a really exciting time in this industry. This is not an industry that's dying. You know what I'm saying? The VCR repair industry is dead. Okay. The horse-drawn carriage industry is absolutely dead. Ours feels like it's just kind of getting going, and it's awesome.
So here is a question from a listener. This is interesting. I think women see this field as a career and men see it as just a stepping stone. How do we change that mindset? I will say, I think that's a very interesting question. I wish there was some way for me to quantify that in a research study, and I suspect the listener is right, but I don't have any hard evidence for that. But Lisa or Ellen, I'd be curious what you think of the observation there. And I don't know, is it something where we need to change the mindset?
Do you want to go first, Ellen, or should I?
I'll go first.
You go first.
Oh.
Even better.
Yeah, well, I think it's a valid observation, and I think one of the reasons for that is the chief ethics and compliance officer is not often, not always, right, in the C-suite. And so, you have to be the general counsel to get that seat. And, there are only a few of them, right? So you're kind of, the sidearm or at the side of the desk, or you're part of the legal department, right? So if you want to go up, where do you go? And I think the way you change that mindset is to really think about the chief ethics and compliance officer the same way you think about your chief auditor. Right? We should not be allowed to be terminated without notice to the audit committee. We should probably have contracts. Our independence should be clearly put out in the audit committee charter, and we should sit on the executive team.
Lisa, what do you say?
I guess I was thinking about it at sort of a building or growing the career level, and I think one of the things you see a lot with some of the Ethico roles is, after someone gets in trouble, you bring in some partner from a law firm sometimes to run a department. And I think that sometimes men will come into it in a more sort of senior C-suite after a crisis role. And I think that's problematic. I think the day-to-day experience is important. And I think that I'm not sure where we're thinking about with men in it. What are they looking at this as just one of many other hop, skip, and jump in career moves? And is that something that, I think about it more like, what do I want personally? So those are some of my thoughts about it. So I think that's a problem. I think as a general rule, what Ellen said is, making sure that this job, and we've seen some of has the autonomy it needs, has the seniority, and if organizations are basically doubling down on career development, then, thinking of building up your external women who've built careers in there. And then if they've done it that way.
Well, it's an interesting observation that if you are the chief ethics and compliance officer, what do you do after that? Because I have seen a lot of deputy general counsel, chief compliance officer. That's the title, combined. And then the person becomes general counsel. And I could see why, and again, I have no hard specific facts on this, but I think, Ellen, that you're right, that there are definitely a lot of men who say, I got to be in the C-suite, that's it. And so I'm going to do whatever to get there. And it's a pit stop being the CCO, and then they move on. But, I'm trying to think of how the profession could get the CCO role to be a valid final stop or pinnacle of your career. Co-equal to CFO or CIO or head of cybersecurity or general counsel. And, we're not there yet in a lot of companies, I don't think. Is that a problem that we should change? Is it just a fact of life? Is it true, or am I wrong? I don't know. What would you say? Ellen, I'll start with you, but then Lisa. What do you think about that? Like, where do we go once you are the CCO?
Yeah, so I think you go to risk, because every organization has it. Yep. And we have seen some chief risk officers who then are responsible for legal and ethics and compliance, and maybe HR, and maybe ESG or sustainability, right? I think if you want that executive level position, you probably have to be broader than just one topic. And I think risk is where it is, right? Whether you're, doing the audits, you're also doing the enterprise risk assessments, but all of those things dovetail and flow with the kind of skills that you need to be a chief ethics and compliance officer. I think anybody who's a successful chief ethics and compliance officer could be a successful chief risk officer.
Yeah, I would agree. Lisa, what's your thoughts on this?
Or it also can be a very successful member of a board, because I think that that's another thing to think about, because you've dealt with so many different problems. I think professional happiness and what you want, I think that depends a lot on individuals. So to say, is this a problem or not? It's a little bit of a harder thing to say. I also think there is some distinction between very highly regulated industries where your compliance role may be the difference of you keeping a license and staying in business, and you may very likely, and I think in pharmaceuticals or medical or oil and gas, that person may end up in the C-suite because they have to be. I think there are other places where if it goes wrong, it's going to be a huge problem, but it is not basically your license being taken away. And I think depending on what industry it is, where is that? And I also think when you're thinking about stepping stones or ambition or not, you got to look at that too. So.
I do like the idea of compliance officers trying to expand into chief risk officer.
Yeah.
The talents and requirements are very similar. And also, you do not need to have a law degree to become a chief risk officer. But if you want to be a general counsel, yes, you do. And I've met plenty of great compliance officers who are lawyers. I have met plenty of compliance officers who are terrible, who are lawyers. And I've met plenty of great compliance officers who are not lawyers. And it is a nice to have, but not necessarily a need to have. But if you want to move up to general counsel, yeah, you need to have it. So I do take your point, Ellen, that there's a lot that a compliance officer could do to be a good chief risk officer. By the way, you wouldn't have to have a JD to be able to do that or to pass the bar exam. Nick, what do you think about the challenges of trying to get the compliance role established as co-equal with everybody else in the C-suite? How come that's going to be a struggle still?
So I think we can talk about this from like a macro career path perspective, or we can talk about it at the micro, at the individual level. I think at the individual level is where the conversation really should be had. I think in your locale, in your locality or whatever, like in your world, it's really a question of like, how useful are you? And I think any organization wants people that are useful, that quote unquote get it, that are smart, that can get things done. And I think if I look at the compliance officer or the compliance job from that lens, there's so many kind of base tools that you can build in this space that can make you be extremely useful in your organization. And so I'm just saying, think about it. Like, you have to be good at marketing. You have to be good at communication. You have to be good at sales, right? You have to sell your ideas. You have to be good at relationship building. You have to have a good risk eye, right? Like, if you're going to have an effective compliance program, you're allocating your limited resources toward the things that are going to have the biggest impact. That's being able to understand the business and understand the power structure and understand where those resources need to be directed to add ultimately the most enterprise value. And so I think what it actually comes down to is the limiting beliefs that we place on ourselves on where our careers can go. If you believe in your, whatever you think, if you think you can, you think you can't, you're right. If you believe, well, there's nowhere for me to go out of compliance, well, then that's going to be absolutely true. If you can be open to building these skills and looking for how, as Ellen said in her first statement, how I can be a better servant to the organization, how I can be more useful, how I can build these relationships and put your unique gifts to work from that lens, I think there are many different paths up the mountain. Via Health is run by, their CEO was a previous compliance officer. So there's an example of someone elevating to the CEO position. And so I'm just saying, push, we all kind of build these prisons in our minds of like what we're limited by. And I think we can push those walls out a lot further. And there is so much sort of fodder in this space, in this job, to build a unique perspective, unique skills that are readily applicable in a number of different areas inside the organization.
One or two other last questions here before we run out of time. Earlier, Ellen and Lisa, both, you talked about the importance of listening to people, going on listening tours, things like that. I want to flip it around and talk about the telling skills and how important it is to be able to tell a good, concise story, especially if you are, say, reporting to the board and you've got maybe 20 minutes, and if nobody's under subpoena and the Justice Department is not knocking on the door, you don't have anything particularly pressing, you can say what you want to the board. You really have to be able to tell a good, compelling story of what you're doing and why you're relevant. And what advice would you have for compliance officers, let's say to either present to the board or the management team, but about the importance of being able to tell a good, relevant, and concise story? What matters there? Lisa, let me start with you and then Ellen. And then Nick, if you had thoughts on that line too, I'd love to hear them.
I mean, I'm going to quote something that Ellen has said to me, basically, isn't it? Be brilliant, be brief, be gone, which is an oversimplification. But basically what you need to do is, again, back to the key risks from the beginning. What is happening? What does your board need to know to be responsible? What are you seeing? And make sure it's not like these are just the resources we need, but this is what's gone well, this is what isn't going as well, and this is where I need, your view and opinion. And to be able to show them if trends are coming from an investigative or another standpoint. If you suddenly get a surge of, employees that are upset about one particular issue, that may not be this end all be all, but it's definitely showing a cultural trend, and they may need to be aware of this. So plan your thing. Pre-reading is huge. Make sure you've got some, before I say that, you don't want to go in and tell them anything new. There want to be, no surprises, and give them the information and the opportunity to ask their questions and listen to those questions when you go back the next time.
All right. Ellen, what's your advice on being able to tell a good and compelling story?
I think you have to tie it to the business. Why does this impact our ability to succeed? If it isn't really about what we're doing every day, it isn't about achieving our goals, why does anybody care? Right? So if you can't demonstrate that you understand what the company does and how it makes money and how what you do is related to that, I don't know if anybody will care about your story, no matter how well you tell it. So I think that's another critical element.
Yeah, and I think it's an opportunity to control to influence the opinions of powerful people. And, part of that is kind of knowing your audience, kind of to what Lisa was saying before. But part of it is also kind of surmising and kind of guessing what they care about and showing yourself to be kind of the antithesis of what that stereotypical compliance person is, which, let's face it, there's a lot of sort of negative, stereotypes about us. And yet, I haven't seen any boring episodes of the Great Women in Compliance podcast, and I haven't really had any boring episodes of my podcast. Like, everybody I talk to is interesting, has a unique perspective, trying to make the world a better place. I think we need to take advantage of those opportunities to, as Ellen said, tie our efforts to what is important for the business, to what that board, cares about, and demonstrate in real time what an asset we are to the organization.
Yeah, one of the reasons I asked that question is last week I was at a conference where the keynote speaker, and this was for anti-fraud professionals, the keynote speaker was the actor Alex Winter, who is better known as Bill from Bill and Ted. And he had a side business since then of making really compelling prize-winning documentaries about fraud. And who knew this, that, he's made his millions being a space shot, but actually he's a very intelligent guy. And he also said that, he might have 1,000 hours of footage that he has to pare down in 90 minutes, and talked an awful lot about the need to be able to tell a good story and make the dramatic tension clear to people, and focus on who is actually involved in doing the thing. And he's written about, or he produced documentaries on the Panama Papers, the darker side of cryptocurrency trading and illicit money flows, things like that. So I could certainly see why he was relevant to them. But it made me think a lot about, we have a lot of challenges as compliance professionals getting people to care about what we care about, which, we care about regulatory compliance, which at the surface sounds pretty boring, but it's not. It's actually quite compelling when you think about how to inspire people to do the right thing. And you have to do that by being able to tell a story. And
totally.
I do wonder how much compliance officers can do that, and how can you do it when you have the chance in front of the board or somebody else, or frankly, a regulator, as you're trying to explain why you should not be indicted. And a lot of it is that. A lot of it is knowing how to tell a good story.
Yeah, but we care about regulatory compliance to what end? To the end of protecting the business, and to the end of, preserving enterprise value. So I'm just saying, taking that one extra step further to draw that frame around it, and bringing some of our pathos, right? Like, everybody I talk to is very passionate about ethics and compliance. Look at the freaking chat today. You know what I mean? Like, everybody is passionate about this stuff. We have to have the confidence to bring that pathos to the conversation, to really kind of have that emotional connection. Because in any of those documentaries that are award-winning, I'm not familiar with Alex Winter's in particular, but there's an emotional kind of, it's not just like a series of facts, it's an emotional kind of ride through it. And we're all human beings. You're talking to a room of human beings who, by the way, back to Lisa's point, they don't know what they're doing. Okay, even if they're on the board, they're just figuring it out as they go as well. Sorry to burst everyone's bubble, but connect with that, part of telling a good story is, I think, having the right frame around the picture and having some of that emotionality that we live every single day.
All right. Well, we are pretty much out of time, so I will give one last word each to Ellen and then Lisa. 30 seconds only. What would be your one bit of advice for a brand new compliance professional, a young compliance officer or analyst out there for good career success? Ellen first, then Lisa, 30 seconds each. What would it be?
Well, it would be to every professional. What you do matters, and you matter.
All right.
Ooh, got chills on that one, Ellen.
Yep. And 20
Felt
seconds.
like you were talking to me there. That was great.
Lisa, what's your bit of advice?
Think about what people want to be in an environment, and most people want to do the right thing. They just want to know how, in terms of regulatory. So don't waste your time on some of the regulations right away. Figure out how to help people have a good environment that is encouraging them to be ethical and do the right thing. And I think that's the biggest thing. And be a goldfish. Be a goldfish.
Yeah, I love that.
So.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Nick, I don't know if you have any other closing remarks at the end of Ethicsverse Day, but Lisa Fine and Ellen Hunt, thank you very much.
Let's get a massive round of applause for Ellen and for Lisa, and also for Matt. Matt, you really you outdid yourself once again. I don't know how you keep going more and more and higher. I appreciate all of you for joining us today. I also want to give a special thank you to my team. I couldn't even sleep last night. And our team has really pulled out all the stops. So thank you to Joa. Joa did so much work behind the scenes to coordinate all of this. Thank you to Chase for putting all the videos together and the round of applause in real time. Thank you very much. Also for Selena. Selena is our graphics expert. If you like our branding, it's because of Selena putting that to work every single day. So Jack, of course, is over the entire marketing team, and Will as well, with his expertise in helping us to build out these solutions and stuff like that. So I just wanted to, I just feel so grateful. I had high hopes for Ethicsverse Day, and it really blew the doors off of it. We beat all of our goals, had so much, it's so encouraging to read these comments in the chat. And I feel like I learned so much, and that was echoed throughout the chat. So Ellen, thank you so much. Lisa, thank you so much. Matt, you are the man. Yeah. All right. We'll see you guys back here next Thursday for another amazing episode. That concludes Ethicsverse Day 2026. We did it, y'all.
Thank you.